everyone. My name is Beth Wilson, and welcome back to my video series, The Power of Storytelling. In each episode, I invite a guest to share stories that will help us understand discrimination and inequality in order that we all might learn and grow together. I hope through this video series that you walk away inspired by some incredible people and feel equipped with some resources to help you lead your own transformational storytelling conversations. Well, I'm super excited today to welcome a city builder and a colleague, Leslie Wu. Leslie's a tireless female leader whose experiences cross a range of industries from architecture to urban planning, municipal transit, provincial government, and now the not-for-profit sector. She lives and breathes her personal mantra for wanting to do more and always have an impact. And I got to know Leslie through my role as a director on the Civic Action Board. Civic Action is an organization in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area that is a catalyst for positive change, turning collaboration into action to build better and more inclusive cities. And Leslie joined as CEO in September 2020 and is driving high impact leadership programs for diverse rising leaders and equity deserving communities in the region. Leslie's been well recognized for her 25 years of experience as a community activator. She's won multiple awards, including Canada's Top 100 Most Powerful Women in 2017 by WXN, and is passionate about breaking down barriers for underrepresented groups. And she's written extensively on racism and inequity. Leslie, welcome, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you so much, Beth.
It's great to have you here. Why don't we jump right into the conversation, because you have such a unique story. You're a proud Canadian of Asian heritage, but you were born and raised in the Caribbean. So what has that personal history meant for you in terms of how you see racism and how you see yourself in Canada today and really sort of over the years?
Yes, thanks. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share my stories and experiences with you. It's an interesting, coming to Canada, I'm the first of my family to be here. So I came here to go to university. And my parents chose, I was first to go to university in my generation, actually, in my family. And my parents chose Canada, I think partly because Trinidad itself, where I grew up, was a British colony, Canada's a British colony. We looked to this country, Canada, as a model society. And so very welcoming. And I think when you grow up in a colony, as I did, which was one that was very much based on slavery, lots of racism and inequities. There's a certain normalization of colonization that you accept. And so I think what I didn't expect when I came to Canada, that was also the case in this country. And I'm only now peeling back that onion at this time. But coming here, I found myself really doing what many refer to as code switching. Being able to adapt to a new climate, a new culture. I arrived with a very strong Trinidadian accent. No one could understand me. I sort of didn't dress I didn't know how to dress, frankly, for different climates. And I probably, in reflection, was subject to a lot of kind of bias and microaggressions that I didn't even recognize at the time. I think as I arrived here, went to university, even my first jobs when I decided to stay here in Canada and work, it was really merely, I guess I would say, I was surviving. I was ambitious. I wanted to move through. And so a lot of what I changed about myself, and I now call it change, I sort of suppressed certain things, how I talked, when I talked. Trinidad is a very open, loud, don't hold back kind of society. And I had to train myself and learn new ways. Some have been very helpful. Some I recognize now in reflection as things that really were not necessary for me to change. But the situation, the workplace, the environment, the neighborhood that I lived in, those were part of it. So it is a unique experience insofar as most of when we hear things about anti-Asian hate, there is in this country a long history of whether it's the Chinese head tax or the Japanese internship or other such acts of racism against Asians in Canada. Mine is a little different because I came at a different time and my family didn't have this long history um, that I'm now learning about of many other Asian Canadians.
Right, right. So, Leslie, I usually like to start these conversations with a reflection, and it's helpful having the context in terms of your longer history, but shorten that window a little bit to the last 12 months, right? And 2020 was really difficult year for so many communities in Canada, and I think we have a reminder of that this week as we come upon, hard to believe, right, the 1 year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. But I know for you, this process of becoming aware of your experience with racism itself that you just referred to really unfolded differently over this past year. Can you talk about that a little bit as you reflect on the prior year?
Yeah. It's interesting, and because of course hindsight is 2020, and when I relate this, this will sound like a rational, coherent, logical explanation, but in fact, it was 2020 was, I would say, a barrage of mixed emotion, feelings, all at the same time. It was an important year for me, 2020. My kids had mostly all moved out. We were downsizing, so we were changing neighborhoods. I had just completed a significant initiative at my previous employer, Metrolinx, and so there were a lot of endings, and there were a lot of new beginnings. And when the George Floyd, so when the pandemic happened, which was a huge, reflection and reassessment for many of us, that compounded with the murder of George Floyd, which really struck me hard. It caused me to really, really think about how I wanted to spend my own time going forward. And in looking at, the great amount of work I had done prior and being very proud of that legacy and thinking, this is it's a combination of a sign and it caused me to say, I need to figure out how to do more. And so in many respects, I went back to my values that have been with me since I guess since I was born, around the importance of giving back, the importance of helping others, my inherent desire constantly to want to do better, to just always do better. And so I think when the opportunity for civic action came along, I began to think through, well, it wasn't something that I was thinking about immediately because there was a lot I was already had on my plate. I was like, this is an opportunity and I can actually um, have the ability to have a greater impact on a different dimension of city building. I'd spent a lot of my career in what I would call the physical aspect of spatial city building. And I thought this was an extension of that and focusing on one of the root causes of some of the change that we need to have systemically, which is on the face and shape of leadership in the city and the region. I thought this was a great opportunity. So it truly was an inflection point for me. But it wasn't one thing, and it wasn't just George Floyd. I would say it was the combination all at once. And if you have like I do, a very supportive community of peers and family, you feel more confident to make these big changes
Mhm.
because yeah, it is a big change for me, and but one that I don't regret for a moment every second of the day.
When you and I were talking the other week and reflecting, I asked you about the Toronto Star article that you wrote just a couple months ago, right in March 21. And you said it took you a while to write it and find the words. And you talked about, you used an expression with me. You said your kids said to you, you've become more woke as it relates to thinking about racism and your experience with racism. Can you tell us a little bit about that in terms of what was going through your head and what led you to write the article in the Toronto Star?
Yeah. So so many things. I think in many respects, when the incident in Atlanta happened with terrible ending for these Asian women, and of course we were having a discussion at the office, and just a little bit of a questioning, we need to, this is an important piece. The data is showing that in Canada, so this was a US incident, but that in Canada, the rise of anti-Asian hate had been actually larger than in the US on a per capita basis, and that it, as an urban issue, really important to us at Civic Action. And then personally to me, it became a bit of a reflection because, you sort of, I don't know, all of us, we go through our day, we're busy doing what we're doing. We don't even sometimes recognize not only what we're doing to others, but what's happening to ourselves. Because I know I'm a very focused person, but it's caused me to pause. And the team said, well, Leslie, do you have an example of racism? And I kind of I had to really think about it because I actually didn't. There were things that had happened to me in reflection. I would say, well, I guess that was a racist act. I guess that was more than just an unconscious bias. Um, but at the time it was happening, I sort of well, I shouldn't say suppress it. I sort of sloughed it off. I was quiet about it. I didn't say anything about it. And I've been on a couple panels with a couple other Asian Canadian leaders where the culture, Asian culture in of itself says, suck it up, take it on, don't make too much of a ruffle. And I think the Atlanta incident and the data that was, beginning to be showcased said, well, we have to say something. And so I talked about this incident. Well, it happened several times. It wasn't one incident. I live in a really lovely neighborhood, but when my kids were much smaller, often I worked a 4-day week, and on Fridays was my day to spend time with them, and we go to the playground. And I'd say 50% of the time, people would come up to me or treat me as if I was the kid's nanny. And I thought, why would they make that assumption? How could I be so othered in my own neighborhood? I've lived here for over a decade. And so, it seemed at the time fairly innocuous, but I realized after, and I realized now, that was something not done maliciously, but it was a kind of representation of how our society has normalized certain assumptions about people and actions in that way. I think, yeah, I mean, it's also difficult. I shouldn't say difficult. I think the wokeness, if the wokedness for my family has also been. It's not just me. I think collectively, my two kids they're adults and they're biracial, and one looks more Asian than the other, and we've been talking about how that experience has really been different for each of us.
Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me, you have a son and a daughter, right? I've from all of my guests, we've had this conversation about sort of the professional conversations you're having in the workplace and what you're doing as a leader, but then, leading in your family, right? As a parent, and what have those conversations looked like with your children? Your children are older; they're young adults than some of my previous guests. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that. And have your son and daughter, do they experience things differently? Does intersectionality play as well? I'm always interested in talking to moms of daughters too, to see how that comes together.
Yeah, so last year when George Floyd happened. No, so to step back. So my kids have spent a lot of time. We generally try to go to visit my mom, who's in Trinidad, annually. So since they've been 9 months old, so they have a window into that culture. And when the incident happened with George Floyd, both my son and my daughter felt that they needed to educate, read, learn more, and understand, because they felt that while they're not Black, they felt that the culture of the Caribbean and was a culture that was one of oppression, and that was part of their heritage. So we together did a lot of reading and discussion, and then when and we shared, interestingly enough, because my daughter, who, as my mother would say, she could pass for white, is much more, she doesn't look like she has Asian at all. Whereas my son definitely looks, he is biracial, but he does look more Asian. And of course, I look Asian. And so we were having and comparing notes amongst ourselves around our experiences in the city. And my daughter is an engineer, so she went through engineering school. So we would have conversations about gender in a fairly male-dominated society, and when in the course of this year, between the George Floyd incident and what happened in Atlanta, we've been kind of revisiting those conversations, because she was saying, Mom, I wonder if the Asian women in my engineering class, I could, now that I think about it, the experience was probably very different for them than it might have been for me. And then my son talking about, he went to a very diverse high school, and he's got, as most Toronto kids, quite a range of peers and colleagues and backgrounds. And so his window into, he used to joke because he went to a school that was, he said, Mom, I can hang out with the Black kids in my school because I understand Caribbean culture. I can hang out with the Asian kids in my school because I kind of sort of look like them. And then I can hang out with the white kids in the school because I also sort of look like them. But there isn't a small enough group. I'm not either. I'm never one of any of them.
Right.
And that's the otherness of intersectionality.
Right.
Right. And so he saw it as an advantage. But he says, but sometimes it's not so much.
Right. I've heard
So
others articulate it as a sense
yeah,
of, I don't actually fit in any of
yeah.
the
It's a little bit of a
predefined
limbo.
groups.
Yeah, it's a
Right,
little bit of a
right,
limbo.
right,
But
right.
I think what I would say is that it has brought us closer together as a family. It's great that we are, that we have this relationship, that we can talk about these things and share references or movies or whatever, discussions in what we're doing. And we have this. I digitized a whole bunch of old family movies, VHS movies. And so every second weekend, because we can't get together, we spend a little time looking over old movies of when they were like 4, 5, 7. And it's been a good reflection for us about how we've grown as a family.
Yeah, my boys are 20 and 23, so also, having adult conversations. And I was cleaning something up the other night in the kitchen, and they were watching the hockey game, and I overheard my two boys in a deep discussion about racism in the justice system, and I thought, wow, like I don't think 18 months ago I would have heard that kind of dialogue going on
Hmm.
between those two brothers. It's incredible. Maybe just switch gears for a minute, Leslie, off the personal and brought in to talk about Toronto and the business community and the broader community. So one of just about the most diverse city you could think of, but also one of the most challenged in terms of racial inequity. So your thoughts now, speaking as CEO of Civic Action, how can we make progress here at the community level? What can other leaders be doing to engage to make a difference?
So I think step one for me is when asked, because I've been asked this question before. I think the first step is, first of all, understand that and learn about the breadth and depth of the issues of where and how, whether it's the healthcare system, the education system, the policing system, how pervasive and how many of our society are excluded, and how racism plays a role in that. Because I think we see incidents and we see things happening, but I don't think Canada and most Canadians, I think many, but not most Canadians, recognize that this is actually an issue for us as a country. And I think that's the first step. I know if there's the AA 12-step process, is acknowledging the problem and learning about it. I think the second thing I would say, and this is the approach we've taken at Civic Action, is we're trying to get to root cause. And as a result, we are very much focused on saying that in order to have better cities, they need to be more inclusive. Two key areas that we think at this very moment are very critical, which is the pipeline of leaders that are going to be able to face and change the systems that are broken. and that have been part of this ongoing challenge we have. So there's leadership, and then the second piece I think is kind of almost more immediate, which is that we are going to be coming out of or addressing the issue of economic recovery. People use the term build back better. We have to also make sure that how we invest in that is inclusive of
Right.
all equity deserving communities. So we have begun to focus whether it is our diversity fellows program or our emerging leaders network to deepen the commitment to inclusion of Indigenous, Black, and racialized rising leaders, because we feel the more we can equip those rising leaders, showcase and spotlight them, provide them places at the table where decisions are happening, and amplify their voices. I think as a region, we will be in a much more long-lasting, sustainable way able to create a more inclusive city. And so that our energy is very much focused there, Beth, and I think we will do this in partnership with others. We cannot as an organization, all of this is going to take different levels of government, different sectors, different industries working together if we're going to make progress. But I'm hopeful because I get to speak with these young rising leaders very often, and they are a source of eternal inspiration because they are the ones challenging the status quo in a strong, very value-driven way.
Right. I agree with you 100%, Leslie. I've participated in 2 sessions now of the Civic Match program, and these young leaders are so inspirational and they're so bright, and they need support from leaders like us to basically open our networks,
Yes.
but also provide them with some guidance and mentoring and support that they may not have access to. It's a great program. I want to come. So 2 things I want to split apart just to give people some resources if someone wants to take action after this video. So the first step, which was around learning about the problem, educating yourself. Are there any particular studies or resources that you would point people to that are specific to either the Toronto region or Canada as a whole in terms of learning?
Yeah, so actually, and it was useful to me, so hopefully it's useful to others as well. Just earlier this year, we released a report that we did collaboratively with the Boston Consulting Group, very much focused on the pervasiveness of anti-Black racism in Canada. And there are a lot of data points around Toronto and the Greater Toronto Hamilton over and above just all of Canada. But in addition, what I think was really, really good about this report, if I can say so myself, is it did point to some promising practices. So not only did it define the problem and the extent of the problem, because it focused on 4 key sectors within our society, but it also identified ways forward. So examples of success. So that, because I think, the issue can be quite overwhelming. So we don't only want to learn about the problem, we want to know about how we can be part of it. So that's one. The second thing, very much specifically on anti-Asian hate in particular, there's a website and an organization called Project 1907. It has very specific data around the state of Asian Canadians. And it has a lot of the data around and information around the trends, the alarming trends of the increase of hate actions against Asian Canadians. And so that is really good. Those are 2 really good starting points for folks who want to just learn a bit more. I mean, there's quite a lot of data out there now. I mean, there's even books and movies, and just as a footnote, if anyone really wants to have a window into anti-Black racism, there's a recently a short film that won an Oscar called Two Distant Strangers. It's a 30-minute film. It's a remarkable piece that kind of, if you want to kind of even have an inkling of what it feels like to be, well, this is Black in America, but we can translate it and you can interpret it in many different ways. Very powerful.
Great. Thanks, Leslie. Then the second part of my question was, and this is probably more for our Toronto-based viewers and leaders, But if somebody's interested in learning more about some of the specific programs at Civic Action, whether it's Hire Next or Board Match, et cetera, can you give a little snippet on some of those programs and how people can get involved in those?
Certainly. So first of all, I always point people to our Emerging Leaders Network. So for young, doesn't have to be young, but rising leaders, emerging leaders, this is a remarkable network of over 3,000 people from across the region, different sectors, different industries, all very much committed to change and positive change. And so I think, just go online, you could just Google Emerging Leaders Network, Civic Action, and it'll take you right there. We have a registration. It's got a plethora of activities, networking activities, but also information activities, and all around equipping yourself to kind of navigate and be a leader in this space. The second piece, which is our Diversity Fellows, which is a dedicated program, we call it an accelerated civic MBA. So it is, there's a selection process, and every year we graduate 25 to 30 leaders, many of whom go on to do remarkable things. And so if someone is interested in that, it can be directed there. Civic Match is, you mentioned it already, but it is this wonderful pathway to sponsorship. It really leverages the power of, we call it the power of the nudge. One connection that can change your view, your lens, that can lead to many other things. And Hire Next is really targeted at employers. If you are looking to, it's a very simple assessment tool. It takes about 10 minutes to assess things like your job descriptions or your interview questions or your interview protocols. And it kind of gives you 3 actions that you can, suggestions about how to improve, to remove barriers, particularly for young people. And so those are a number, and I think if anyone we have other programs coming up on the horizon, and I think just keep connected with us. So we're at civicaction.ca, and also as well, if you have other questions, we're very well connected with the not-for-profit sector, and we can always help connect people to other organizations who may be focusing on more specialized areas.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Elsie. And I think some of those resources, tools, and ideas, that they're not specific necessarily to the Toronto region either. So they've got wide applicability for people across Canada. So maybe one last question just to wrap up this conversation. Any words of advice? Lots of people are trying to be or working on themselves in terms of being a better ally in these times. Any personal words of advice? What do you tell people who say to you, Leslie, how can I be a better ally, personally?
I think the fact that you want to be an ally is a great step forward. I think the thing to remember that allyship is not a state, it's not a finite state, it's an ongoing lifelong process. And all of us, I mean, literally all of us can be allies for others, whoever the quote unquote other is. And so I think keep that in mind. Once you've made one step, take another. And once you've done multiple things, just continually do more. I think I talked about the systemic nature of the racism that is inherent, that's been kind of covered up, whether it's Indigenous communities, Black communities, any other racialized communities. So it's going to take a long time. It's going to feel tiring. And then I think the test of how you're progressing is not your own assessment. It's the people that you're working with, or you live in your neighborhood, or whoever you're interacting with. The biggest kudo is when they thank you for being an ally. And so it's not something that you can define yourself. It's going to have to be defined by those who are the ones who have been feeling the pain for a while. So
Right.
I think, but always do more. So I think that would be my advice.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that advice from you, Leslie, because that sounds like it's all about having impact and furthering your impact on this journey. So not surprised at all. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really great conversation and lots of terrific resources for our viewers. So really appreciate it, Leslie. And it's a real joy working with you and the team at Civic Action. Thanks again.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for your leadership in doing this. Very, very, very admirable. Thank you.